At my daughter's engagement dinner, the one he paid for with my savings, though he didn't know I knew, I stood up to make a toast and instead pressed play. His voice filled the restaurant, slick and soft, saying, "Delete her number. Make her think it's her idea." By the time the room realized who he meant by her, the papers my daughter had signed looked very different from the ones he'd slid across her lap. He smiled at me then, slow as a knife being wiped clean, because he believed there was nothing left for me to do. He didn't know I'm 62, and I have made a life out of running out of options and finding one more anyway. My name is Vera. I have 3 silver crowns in my mouth I paid for on a payment plan when interest rates were sky-high, a left knee that clicks when it rains, and a granddaughter who thinks I can fix anything because I once repaired her doll's elbow with a paperclip and nail polish. I have one daughter, Lena, 35, capable, tender, stubborn as her father, God rest him, and this story is about the months where a stranger rehearsed the phrase, "cut your mother off," so many times it became music to him. The night Lena introduced us, he was carrying lilies. He had the kind of smile that tells you he knows how light catches a camera lens, and eyes that stayed exactly as sad as the story he told you. His name was Adrian Vale. He was fixing old buildings, he said, a developer who wanted to make spaces for families. He touched the back of Lena's chair as he spoke, casual, claiming. He apologized for being late because a client's permits got stuck at the city office. He kissed my cheek like he'd practiced at a mirror. We met at a volunteer shift, Lena said, bright. He was stocking the pantry shelves at St. Mary's. He's the one who convinced me to take the extra boxes. Oh, I said, stirring sugar into my tea. Did he now? She was lifting more than anyone else there. He looked at me with soft admiration. It gave me a fright. I made her promise to leave the heavy bags to me. That was the first trick I learned about Adrian. He always made kindness sound like a command you'd be a fool to refuse. They left my apartment after dinner with leftovers and my Tupperware. I rinsed the plates, wiped the stove, sat down in the quiet, and felt the echo of his voice, that warm baritone with nothing rough in it at all. When the heat kicked on, my knee answered, click click, and I told myself to mind my business. I also told myself I was lying. The first message came a week later while I was stirring a pot of borscht, the steam fogging my glasses. Lena, Mom, Adrian thinks it's healthier if I set some boundaries for a while. We can still text, of course. Just, maybe not call every day. I called. It went to voicemail. I left a careful message where I said, I hear you. I love you. Then I put my phone down beside the stove and watched red beet steam curl toward the ceiling like smoke from something I couldn't yet see. By the 3rd week, the boundaries had grown teeth. A text arrived. It's not about you, Mom. It's about us. Adrian says constant parental input can be enmeshing. Enmeshing. It sat on my tongue like a tablet I couldn't swallow. I made a list. When I am frightened, I write. It makes the fear line up and show me its face. I wrote Adrian's name at the top and underneath. Lilies, late, volunteer pantry, developer, enmeshed, permits, boundaries. Then I added another word I didn't want to think about, isolating. Mom, you're catastrophizing, Lena said when I answered her 5th text by appearing at her door with soup, because walls are only walls. This is temporary. She leaned against the door frame so I could see Adrian in the living room on the couch, his arm draped. He lifted 2 fingers in a wave, face set to mild concern. We love you. Do you? I said. That's a relief. It was going to be awkward otherwise. She laughed then a little, because I've learned humor can turn a stubborn moment on its hinge. The laugh made Adrian's gaze flicker. I saw his eyes do a small, precise calculation, the way you watch someone count cash by thumbing bills. In that little flicker, I recognized a thing I had seen only a handful of times, once in a loan officer's office when my husband was sick and the man across from me slid a folder back and said, "This is how it works, Mrs. Markova." He meant, it works this way for me. I stopped by the pantry the next day. The volunteer coordinator, a woman named Lil, remembered Adrian. Tall, perfect hair, fancy watch, she said. Came 3 Saturdays and brought his own photographer the 3rd time, which was a choice. She had liked him. Everyone did. He told me he's flipping the old Merton building on Oak. My fingers paused on the clipboard. Flipping. He said, preserving the bones, but I've watched enough shows to know flipping when I hear it. Lil leaned in. Your daughter seems smitten. She has good taste, I said, and signed up for the Wednesday evening shift. When my husband died 8 years ago, I lasted 2 weeks without a project before I started taking night classes to keep my mind from slipping down the drain of grief. Some people knit. I learned to read deeds. I can spot a forged signature easier than I can find my own glasses, and I know how a man can own a building and never appear on any paper at all. I went home and opened the county recorder's site. I searched Merton and Oak and found deeds spanning 1923 to last year. The last transaction was a transfer from a shell with an old woman's last name to an LLC whose registered agent was a male slut. In the list of officers, I found a name that sounded like a joke: Primroses and Plum. I recognized the parlor trick, an LLC inside another, until the money is a hand pulled through a long sleeve and comes out clean. Then I looked up permits. If Adrian had been at the city office, there would be a record. On the public portal, there wasn't. I shrugged. Maybe he had been there about something else, or maybe he'd been where men like him often are when they say city, which is a cigar lounge with a view of it. The next Saturday at the pantry, Adrian arrived with coffee for everyone and a photographer with a camera the size of a newborn. He kissed Lena on the forehead with the back of his hand and then asked Lil to take a group shot, volunteers lifting, arms around each other. I stood just outside frame holding a crate of oranges. Adrian smiled at me over Lena's shoulder, the gentle version of a challenge. Vera, he said at the end of the shift, come to dinner. He named a place where the waiter knows which glass is for water without being told. I said yes. There are times to pull back and times to move my night where he didn't see a piece at all. At dinner, he told me about his childhood, hungry, hard, and about the aunt who taught him to fold sheets sharply. He spoke like a man who had trimmed his backstory into a hedge neat, identical from every angle. He told me about the Merton, how it deserved better than the mildew he found. He slid his napkin across the table to wipe a ring of condensation I had missed. He said the word legacy without a blush. Lena says you think we're moving too quickly, he said then, and the light in his eyes pinned me like a butterfly. I think my daughter folds herself to make room for other people, I said. I want to make sure she hasn't mistaken your hunger for generosity. He laughed as if I'd complimented him. You cut right to it, don't you? I've had 62 years to practice. Then you'll understand this. She is my future, he said, voice dropping a degree. And futures require clear lines. The constant calls. Stop there, I said, soft. You don't get to rewrite the entire dictionary in our first week. Constant, used to mean nightly chats about soup and work gossip. If it now means me asking whether my child slept, then we have a new language to negotiate. Every family is different, he said. I'm protecting what's ours. He said ours and did not mean me. When the waitress brought dessert, he spread his hands. I want us to get along. Then don't ask her to choose, I said. Men who love building things shouldn't start by tearing down what came before. That night I went home and put my phone on the kitchen table. Then I pulled from the drawer the small black device my granddaughter once called Grandma's spy plug. It's a little recorder that sticks to the underside of a table. I'd bought it when my landlord tried to switch out my lease and pretend the change had always been there. The lease was not the same, and neither was he after I played the audio to his supervisor. Some people need to hear themselves out loud to know who they are. I placed the recorder under Lena's coffee table the next afternoon when she asked me to drop by the set of plates she'd borrowed. Floorboards are uneven, I said, lowering myself carefully. You'll want pads on the chair legs. Adrian's got felt ones, she said. He's good at details. I smiled. By the end of the second week, the recorder had gathered hours, Lena laughing, the kettle whistling, and Adrian's voice pitching phrases like a salesman flicking cards. He never said anything like, don't talk to your mother, not at first. What he said was, she's anxious. She offloads it on you. She'll be fine. Let's have a week with no daily check-ins and see. Then came, I'm proud of you. You held the line after Lena ignored my call. Then, boundaries aren't punishment. They're proof you've grown. Then, you told me she made you feel small as a teenager. This is putting your inner child first. And when Lena cried, because once while she was cooking, she sliced her finger and instinct made her reach for the phone and then stop, he said, there is nothing she can give you now that I cannot. Love is choosing. Love is choosing. The words landed with the weight of a vow and the shape of a threat. I saved the timestamps and, late that night, I turned to the next part of the game, paper. I called a woman named Carol I know from the library where I shelve books for the seniors' computer class. Carol's sister handles title searches for an attorney who collects deeds like other people collect coins. I'm not looking to buy, I said. I'm looking to see. Carol understood. Some women see a shark fin and call it a shadow. Some of us have learned the difference from too many afternoons sitting with the tide. What she found wasn't a big revelation. It was a small one. The Mertens LLC was under another, Primroses and Plum. That second one was registered by a tiny paralegal office with a name I recognized from the city permits board. 3 months ago, a man with Adrian's height attended a meeting about a variance and used a different name, a veil. That is nothing, you might say, a man shortening his surname. But on the minutes, another man referenced him as Mr. Valenko. Another alias, a Slavic tail on a Latin body. If you are building a house you plan to leave through the back door, you do not imprint your full name on the wet concrete. I went to the Merton. The brick organized itself the way old buildings do, proud despite peeling. A worker with a neon vest carried a roll of wire inside. You with veil, he asked. I frowned like a woman who'd misplaced her keys. Which name is he using today? The worker laughed in the precise way a person laughs when he thinks he's safe. Tell him to pick one and stick with it. Tell him yourself, I said, and went home. The next message from Lena wasn't words. It was silence, a whole day of it, and that is louder. When she finally wrote, it was to invite me to a little engagement thing at our place. The words little and are were bait and hook. I replied, I will bring poppy seed cake, and bought 24 small envelopes with tiny gold stamps. If a woman has nothing else, she is time, and I used mine like a scalpel. I drafted a notice, too, in fact. One was a love letter disguised as a legal form, a domestic partnership agreement spelling out that any financial accounts opened during their upcoming cohabitation would remain separate property unless otherwise agreed in writing, that any funds gifted by third parties would remain the sole property of the recipient, that any debt incurred by one party would not attach to the other. The drafting was tidy. The second document was a mirror that would look real if you glanced quick, joint access authorization for a short-term liquidity line attached to Lena's savings. It was filled with blanks and the sort of legal words meant to numb a person into sign here. I printed both on crisp paper that smelled like a stationery shop I could not afford in 1993. I put the real one in a blue folder. I put the decoy in a black one. Then I wrote 22 invitations to the tiny engagement dinner and tucked them into envelopes addressed to people Adrian loved to be seen by, a councilman he'd charmed with his speech about community gardens, a banker, a pastor whose church had a camera in the aisle. I hand-delivered them. When you are 62, people assume you are bringing cookies. Sometimes you are. That night I dreamed of the old house where my husband and I first lived and woke up with my heart racing because the sound in the dream had been someone sanding a door. In the morning I realized it was the sound of a man trying to make an old door shut on a frame it was never built for. You can sand and sand, the wood remembers. The week before the party, the recorder under Lena's table caught a new tune. Adrian's voice, low, you need to clear your accounts if we're serious. Put it briefly, no surprises. Clean. Consolidated. Lena, it's already simple. Adrian laughed. Even simpler. Open one account. Joint. It's easier to qualify for the mortgage on Lennox. Why are you talking like a banker? Because someone has to, he said softly, in the tone that had first hooked her. You're an artist. I'm the strategy. Later, the same night, after she'd gone to bed and a girlfriend had texted asking for brunch, Adrian spoke into his phone in a different voice, the one without sweetness. She's almost done with her mother. After the party, we'll have leverage, he said. No, the mother isn't a problem. She'll fold. Another voice said something too low to catch. Adrian, Just make sure the Valenko file is clean. I sat on my couch and felt my chest compress. I listened to it again, and again it sounded like a man describing a chessboard, not a woman he claimed to love. I do not believe in miracles, not the kind that come from clouds. But I do believe in the miracle of a neighbor whose window faces the alley. The next day I visited our old friend Svetlana 3 floors down and asked if the cameras her son had installed still pointed at the alley by Lena's building. Of course, she said. We catch raccoons like celebrities. Do you ever keep the clips? Svetlana smiled like a woman with 3 grandchildren and a private joy. Vera, I keep everything. Why? Because sometimes the only difference between a truth and a lie is the angle. That afternoon, Svetlana's son sent me a trove of clips, Adrian leaving, arriving, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with a stack of envelopes, once with a long thin box shaped like a record. In one, he stood in the alley on the phone. He was not smiling. He said, "No, we go now. She's malleable. The mother is the only unpredictable factor. She has the look of a woman who has had to fire a landlord." Yes, that look. My cheeks warmed. I had not expected to be seen. The engagement dinner bloomed up like something planted too close to a storm. The councilman sent regrets. The banker texted a confirmation with 3 champagne emojis. The pastor wrote, "It will be an honor to bless your home." The woman from the permit board replied with a ... then, of course. Her name, funny how names recur in life, like themes, was Plum. I carried the poppy cake in both hands. I had pinned to my blouse the tiny brooch Adrian complimented at dinner, hoping vanity was his blind spot. When I walked in, the room smelled like many things that had not been there an hour before. Flowers tall as a child, lamb, lemon oil. I saw Lena standing at the counter with cheeks flushed, flower on her wrist where she'd wiped a hand. She looked happy in the way a person looks happy when the music is very loud and you haven't yet noticed you can't hear anything else. Adrian embraced me with a son's warmth. He had memorized a son's warmth somewhere and could perform it for any audience of one. "Vera," he murmured. "This means a lot." "Thank you for including me," I said, and felt him loosen a fraction because he believed I was where he wanted me, grateful. He toasted. He spoke of Lena's laugh and her courage to say yes when life had given her reasons to say no. He did not mention me in the toast, which was good public relations too. Mothers are dangerous in rooms where love is currency. When the laughter softened, he lifted Lena's hand and placed a sleek folder atop it. "Just some logistics," he said. "Boring. Thanks." Lena looked up as a person does when the water in the pot overflows, surprised, then apologetic. "Can it wait?" she said. "Of course," he said, but the folder stayed heavy in her lap. "Sign only the yellow tabs. It will make the mortgage clean." I reached into my bag and withdrew the blue folder with the partnership agreement. "Yours too," I said cheerfully. "From me. A nosy mother's peace of mind. It spells out that gifts given to my daughter, say, for a house, remain hers, and that neither of you assumes the other's debts. Dull things." I drew on an attorney friend. "Read later. Sign if it speaks to you." The room shifted the way rooms do when 2 magnets come near. Adrian smiled, controlled. "Of course," he said. "Smart." "It is," the banker chimed in, drunk on his own knowledge. "I always advise prenups." "Not a prenup," I said. "A partnership agreement. Less romantic, more accurate." Lena squeezed my hand. "Thanks, Mom." The night rolled forward on tracks he had laid expertly. We ate. We laughed. Adrian moved between groups like a conductor. At some point, the pastor said a blessing and he and the banker left early because men with calendars always do. I waited until the clatter softened to introduce my gift. "A toast," I said. "And a sound." I pressed play on my phone. When you want a room to listen, you don't raise your voice. You lower it and give people the sense they might miss something if they chew. The first clip was nothing kettle quiet. A few people glanced toward the door, as if the mystery might walk in late. Then Adrian's voice, "Delete her number. Make her think it's her idea." A sound soft, puzzled, rose from the couch where the florist's assistant had perched. Lena frowned, head tilting. Adrian laughed, bright. "What is this?" "Vera, that's private." Recorded in my daughter's home, I said. Where she cooks. He looked past me, scanning the faces for the safest place to perform outrage. He must have thought the banker was still here. He wasn't. The second clip. She'll be fine. Let's have a week with no daily check-ins and see. Adrian? Lena said, barely. He leaned forward. Babe, context. We were. The third clip. There is nothing she can give you now that I cannot. Love is choosing. Silence. Then someone, quietly, wow. Adrian stood. He had prepared for this. I could see now, the way his body eased as if into a well-worn suit. I love you both, he said. Vera, your grief is understandable. Lena, I'm sorry I let boundaries sound like an ultimatum. That was clumsy. I was trying to protect us. You called me malleable, Lena whispered. You said leverage. He smiled, winning. I said you're strong. I said we need tools. You're an artist, baby, you know how. Tools? The word fell heavy. That would have been the moment to strike, but I had not brought a hammer. I had brought a needle and thread. The folder, I said. The yellow tabs. Let's see if they match mine. Adrian took the black folder on the coffee table, his, and placed it gently beside my blue one. This is ridiculous, he said, and opened to a tab. He started to read. His face did not change. That is how you know a man is frightened. His stillness becomes effort. Lena touched the page with a fingertip. Why does this authorization say joint liquidity attached to my savings? Why is your name above mine? It's a form, he said. Will. It's a pipeline, I said. To drain her accounts. He laughed. You think so little of me. I think exactly of you, I said. But that's not a crime. Yet, someone murmured. There's always one person in every room who reads legal thrillers and waits for a chance to quote them. Lena stood. Let's step outside, she said to Adrian, and to me, stay. They stepped into the hall. The door clicked. Conversation swelled and split and swirled like river water around a sudden rock. The florist's assistant whispered to her phone. A neighbor with a baby shifted from foot to foot. I stood by the cake and watched the door and wished the old trick of prayers still worked on me the way it had when my husband coughed at night and I counted each breath. They came back in together, faces composed. We're taking a pause, Lena announced. No more decisions tonight. Everyone, thank you for coming. Adrian has a headache. He went to gather his coat. He walked like a man in a room full of invisible tripwires. He sent me a message at 2:17 a.m. He must have meant to send it to someone else, someone whose voice I had heard once, thin, Excel smooth, but I had set up call forwarding on a spare line I bought after the landlord incident, and so God or physics put his voice in my kitchen again. It's okay, he said into the dark. She's attached to the mother, yes. We can wait. The Valenko file is ready. The loan will wipe if we have to disappear. She trusts me. I slept 2 hours and woke with that phrase, wipe if we have to disappear. I made coffee strong and cold and opened my laptop. Detective work looks glamorous on television. In my kitchen, it looks like reading page after page of city council minutes and learning which lines the clerks copy and paste. It looks like searching for Valenko in a cross-referencer a Ukrainian man built and left online for anyone in our neighborhood because his brother once got scammed and he swore it would not happen again. It looks like chiseling at a feeling until it shows you its bones. By noon, I had a picture with only 2 missing pieces. Adrian had used 2 names in public, 3 in private, and 1 in a set of loan applications filed out of state. The applications weren't signed by him, not exactly. They were signed by an agent and notarized from a barbershop address that belonged to a man who had been charged once for falsification under color of assistance, a description so bland it made my teeth hurt. The loans were small, and then one was big. The big one was attached to the Merton, and the Merton had a new lien that looked like a magician's flourish. You had to know where to look to see it. I called a number I had not dialed in 6 years. Rosa? I said when she answered. It's Vera. I need to borrow your brain. Rosa was a retired claims investigator with a face like an old coin, beautiful because every scar told you exactly what it was worth. She owed me nothing. Once, a long time ago, I sat next to her at a dialysis center and held her purse when the nurse asked her to put it down, and when she came back, she said, You looked at it like it was my hand. We'd been Christmas card friends, nothing more. Sometimes the people who can save you live at the edge of your life, waiting for you to finally admit the water's too deep. While Rosa listened, I laid it all out: the clips, the pods of paperwork, the alias that acquired a tail, the barber with a notary stamp in his drawer, the bank officer who liked speeches about community, and photographs in which cheering children held shovels. "Oh, honey," she said when I finished. "He's playing 3 games and he thinks you're a checker. But you're a rook." "I thought the rook only moved straight," I said. "Exactly," she said, and laughed. "Bring me the papers. Bring me tea." We sat at her kitchen table with its vinyl tablecloth that used to be flowers and was now a pale memory of petals. "He collects women who look like the city wants them," she said. "Good donors. Clean families. He holds them apart from their mothers because mothers ask questions. He uses the word leverage in private because leverage is what he thinks love is. He registers short-term debt for a property no one can actually afford. Then he flips the second lien and disappears. If someone asks questions, he blames the woman who loved him," she signed. "If the police come, he uses the name with the tail and says he's authentic. He's from somewhere it's easy to be tired from." "You sound like you've met him," I said. Rosa smiled in a way that had nothing to do with her mouth. "I've met a few like him." "What do I do?" I asked. "What you already started. You make 3 copies, one for the bank's fraud unit, one for the city, and one for the person who will be on the evening news if she ignores you." She tapped Plum's name. "You do not call the police. They need crimes. You have patterns. You do not attack him. That will make her defend him. You put him between 2 other men who think they're sharks. Then you leave him there. And Lena? Give her a place where she doesn't have to be brave," Rosa said. "Brave gets women hurt." The next morning, I sent a packet by courier to the bank's security officer, a man who, if rumor was right, hated to be embarrassed in print. I sent one to the city's inspector general with the subject, "Multiple similar signatures, possible printer usage across notarized documents," and a note that said, "I'm 62 and my hands shake. That's why my signatures never look exactly the same." I CC'd the permit office and Plum and the councilman. I mailed copies by registered post because paper matters most when it arrives 2 different ways. Then I made soup and waited for the part of the story where I always want to run and have learned, across 62 years, to sit instead. It's where people reveal themselves. 3 days later, the bank called Lena. Not me. The woman on the phone introduced herself as internal risk and used the tone rich people use to tell you your flight has been upgraded. "There have been some questions about the joint account application," she said. "We'd like you to come in alone to answer a few routine queries." Lena texted me. "Do you know anything about this?" I wrote, "What color are you wearing today?" Because when she was little and frightened before a recital, I'd ask, and she'd answer and remember there was a body around the fear, a body wrapped in blue. She wrote back, green, and then, after a moment, "Come with me." At the bank, the officer was a man with a necktie as wide as a river. He smiled at me and then turned his smile down a few degrees, like a dimmer switch, for Lena. He laid the application on the table and rotated it slowly to face her. "Do you recall signing this?" he asked. He tapped one line. "And this?" Lena stared. "No. Sometimes people sign without remembering." He sounded almost gentle. "I didn't sign that," Lena said again, and her voice did a thing I will not forget. It gathered its whole life inside itself and stood up in a room where once, not so long ago, it would have gone small. "I didn't. Also, the font is different." I smiled before I could stop myself. She is an artist. I had hoped details would save her if love ever failed. The officer coughed. "We're going to freeze this for now," he said. "Standard." On the way out, we saw Adrian at the teller line. He looked at us, surprise flashing and then smoothing into relief. "Babe," he said. I was just. "Don't call me babe," she said, and walked past him. He stood very still, like prey that thinks the hunter sees only movement. Then he turned to me and smiled and whispered, "You think you've won." "I think you've underestimated poppy seeds," I said. "What?" "Never mind," I said. "You'll understand when you eat cake alone." He called twice that night. She didn't answer. He texted 3 promises and a memory. He showed up the next morning with coffee and my granddaughter's favorite muffins, which made me hate him more than the schemes did. He cried. Tears are just water. They mean nothing until they clean something. When she didn't open the door, he left a small black box. Don't touch it, I said. We watched it sit there like a sparrow on a windowsill in winter, harmless unless it came in out of the cold. Inside was a ring. Inside the ring was a seam. Inside the seam was a chip. My granddaughter, who can take apart a phone and reassemble it in less time than it takes me to toast bread, found it in 4 minutes. It's a tracker, she said. And a microphone. She looked at me with serious eyes that broke my heart. Baba, bad men aren't allowed to be good at science. I kissed her hair. They can be good at anything, I said. We'll be better. We gave the ring to Rosa, who gave it to someone she knew who worked in a windowless part of the bank, and the someone came back with a list of pings. The ring had talked, late at night, to a device near the Merton and to another near a small storage facility by the river whose units are rented for cash. We went to the facility. The man behind the desk looked like a snowman someone had forgotten to finish. He asked for a key. We had none. He asked for a name. Valenko, I said, and he laughed in the exact way a man laughs when you have accidentally stepped on the part of his shoe he polishes carefully. We did not get inside. We didn't need to. The ring pinged again at 1:13 a.m. And the someone in the windowless office smiled at Rosa because he loved puzzles and not because he loved us, and the next day the city inspectors visited the Merton and raised their eyebrows at the wires. And the bank began to ask the kind of questions men like Adrian call fatally insulting, and the councilman forwarded my envelope to a reporter who prides himself on being the last honest man in a city full of brunch. Sometimes justice arrives in a cheap tie. That should be the end of the story. It isn't. The detective plot ends here, the paper done, the chip speaking, the inspectors writing notes in that delicate handwriting that looks like lace and means you are not going to like this. The revenge part should end here too, with the ring exposed, and the man bending in the exact way pride bends when it finally notices its own shadow. But revenge, even in a life as long as mine, is never a single fire. It is a tapestry, tight, careful, each knot tied so the back is neat. 2 mornings after the inspectors, Lena texted, he wants to talk. In public. Come. We met him at a diner with a tile floor scrubbed so hard it had become a mirror for people's shoes. He sat with his back to the window. He was very handsome in the way a chessboard looks very plain. I'll make this simple, he said. I'll disappear. She keeps her money. No police. You do nothing else. He leaned forward. You think I don't know the limits? There are rules. You mean you don't want to be embarrassed, I said. I mean you have no idea who you'll wake if you don't let this go. What is that, a threat? Lena asked, calm. I wanted to kiss her for how her voice had learned to stay level in rooms where it once shook. Adrian, you tracked me. You forged my signature. His smile cracked and I finally saw the boy he had hidden all this time, the one who had become a man by memorizing how to look like one. Baby, I love you, he said. I did a bad thing. Not like you think. He swallowed. When I was 19, I signed a debt I couldn't pay. I've been paying it ever since. I looked at him. That could be true. A life can be one long payment plan. The terrible thing is that some men decide the best way to pay their debt is to make a woman owe them more. Where would you go, I asked, if you disappear? He looked up at me, surprised by the question. South, he said, too quickly. Or east. Everyone says south when they mean nothing, I said. East is for people who miss a gray sky. Vera, he said, tired. I'm asking you not to ruin me. You're asking me to stop you from ruining her. He put his hands flat on the table. There's something you don't know, he said, and I understood that everyone thinks their secret is the only one with teeth. What? Lena asked, a small quiver in the word. He looked at her, and for the first time I saw something that might have been love and might have been calculation wearing love's perfume. He called me, Adrian said. Your father. Lena blinked. My father is dead. Adrian shook his head. Before he died. Years ago. He called me during rehabs, during relapses. He paid me once to find you when you didn't call him back. He paid me to make sure you didn't repeat what he called your mother's mistake. He told me. Lena stood so fast her chair scraped. Stop. The diner went quiet the way diners do when the people who live there are deciding whether to pretend not to hear. I am leaving, she said. Both of you can stay and argue about ghosts. She walked out. The bell on the door made the saddest sound a bell can make. It told us what we already knew. I started to stand and Adrian reached across the table with an instinct so old it must be born with men like him. He grabbed my wrist. Don't follow her. His voice was gone. He had run out of voice. I looked down at his fingers on my skin. The hand was warm, human. I did not pull away. You loved that she was far from me because it meant you could be close, I said. You mistake love for proximity. That's your first failure. Your second is thinking secrets stay buried when the ground is full of roots. If you are even a little telling the truth about my husband, it doesn't redeem you. It ruins him. He let go. The engagement dinner, I said softly as I stood, the toast? You were wrong about what I wanted. I didn't want to ruin you. I wanted to put you on a table under a bright light and make sure everyone knew which parts were yours and which you stole. At the door I turned. Eat, I said, because I am still a mother even in rooms where I wish I were not. You'll need your strength. Lena didn't go home. She texted me hours later from a park we used to go to when she was 12 and trying out the idea of anger. He said Dad called him, she wrote. Is that true? She followed it with a message I do not think she knew she was sending. Am I my mother's mistake? I went to her. I sat on the bench beside her the way I did 2 decades ago when a boy in her class had called her too loud and she'd come home quiet for a week. There was a time your father thought my love was a trap, I said. He thought if I stopped calling his name down the stairs, he would turn into someone else. He was wrong. It is a thing men get wrong because loving looks like holding to people who are afraid of falling. Your father and I never agreed about my voice. I am loud. He was tired. Both things were true. It does not mean you are anyone's mistake. She nodded, crying now. What if I had signed everything, Mom? She whispered. What if you hadn't? You would have come back, I said, though it is possible the life would have bent differently and the far shore would have been another country entirely. You are stubborn. You would have found your way. We sat until it was dark enough for the lamps to come on and make every leaf look painted. My granddaughter sent a picture of their cat wearing a sweater she had knit from a sock. The ridiculousness of the world saved us. Rosa called the next day. The bank did the thing, she said. The inspectors did theirs. Plum too. He'll be tied up in depositions for a while and he knows it. That won't stop him, I said. No, she said. But it will slow him. What do I do with my anger? I asked. I had not asked this question in years. Anger used to be a fire that kept me warm when the rent was late and the baby had a fever and the boss called me dear when he meant invisible. Now it felt like embers I didn't know whether to cup or stamp out. You aim it, she said. At something that makes meaning. The something arrived 3 days later in the mail. A thin envelope with no return address postmarked 2 cities away. Inside was a photograph of the Mertens' basement and a note. There is a second ledger, not in the safe. Look for the pipe with the blue thread. If you expose that, you expose all of it. Bring a flashlight. Wear shoes you can ruin. No signature. No flourish. I felt the small thrill of recognition you feel when you realize someone else is also watching, also listening, also waiting for the moment the curtain leaves the stage and the empty floorboards tell the truth. I did not tell Lena. Some truths are not daughter's work. I went at noon, when men like Adrian are often in meetings they think matter. The Mertens' side door had a lock that loved old keys. The basement smelled like water and wires and a plan. I found the pipe easily. The blue thread looked like a joke, a ribbon around something ugly. Inside the hollow behind it, wrapped in plastic, a small ledger the size of my hand. Names. Dates. Amounts. A line of handwriting too careful to be real. A list of women. Beside some names, a small star. Beside others, a cross. I knew what the star meant. I did not want to know what the cross did. I took photographs with my phone. Then I slid the ledger back into the wall because there are kinds of power you do not lift until you've found somewhere to set them down. At the top of the stairs, a voice. What do you think you're doing? Adrian. The question did not sound like a challenge. It sounded like genuine curiosity, as if he were watching an old trick from a new angle and trying to memorize it. Looking, I said. It's trespassing, he said. Sometimes truth is trespassing, I said. You've known that most of your life. He came down 2 steps, stopped. You don't have any idea who you're playing with. You, I said. And the women behind the blue thread. He took another step. Leave. Or what? I asked, soft. You'll call the police and show them your signatures? He raised his hand, then let it fall. You win, he said. No, I said. I never want to win things like this. We stood in the cold concrete light, 2 people whose lives had bent in different weather. I thought of the 19-year-old who signed something he couldn't pay. I thought of the ledger with stars of crosses. I thought of my husband who once held our daughter on his shoulders at a parade and then learned he was softer than his own grief and left us with a house that felt like a bruise for a year. Go, he said then, tired. Before someone sees you here. I came to be seen, I said. That's the point. He laughed, unexpected, the first true sound he had made in my presence. You're terrifying, he said with a sort of admiration that made me sad because it told me what impressed him. I am a mother, I said. I walked out into the sharp noon, the kind that makes shadows behave. I mailed the pictures to the Inspector General. I mailed copies to Rosa. I mailed one to a reporter who did not answer, but who I know printed them and put them in a folder named Merton Threads. Then I made tea and cleaned the sink and fed the cat and waited for the part of the story that would be mine, not the city's. It came 4 days later at the house of worship, where the pastor with the camera blessed people and their mortgages. Adrian stood at the front and confessed, not sin, but inconvenience. He said the renovations were delayed because of paperwork issues. He said those who had invested would be fine. He said, family is about trust, and I realized he believed churches were places where words could put their feet up and no one would ask them to work. He saw me in the 3rd row and bobbed his head like a man greeting a neighbor whose fence he plans to borrow tools to fix soon. Lena did not come. She was painting. The painting was all gray at first, then the edges of a chair. Then a door you could not see until you stepped back. It's nothing, she said when I asked. Or it's everything. When the first article ran, it did not name him. It named the office and the pattern and the phrase blue thread. Women called, women wrote, women sent photographs of leases where their names were spelled correctly on the first line and wrong on the second. The Inspector General's office opened a formal investigation with a number you could look up. Plum resigned quietly, the way a person leaves a party early when the coat check is understaffed. The bank froze 2 more accounts. None of this felt like victory. It felt like sweeping glass in a crowd satisfying, but you know you'll miss a shard and someone will step on it tomorrow. This is the part of revenge stories that playlists don't like. It is slow. It is uncinematic. It is clean because there is no blood. It is still a kind of blood. A week passed. 2. At night, I would sometimes wake with a start and think of the ledger and the crosses and wonder whether they meant debt default or something colder. Then I would get up, drink water, check the lock twice, and sit by the window where the light from the street paints everything in the color of forgiveness and does not actually forgive. On a Tuesday, Adrian texted. She won't answer. Tell her, I'm sorry. Tell her, I leave tomorrow. I wrote, which name will you wear when you go? He wrote, the true one. I wrote, I do not believe you have learned it yet. He wrote, maybe not. That night, I watched the alley camera with Svetlana. We are ridiculous, 2 old women with mugs of tea and a vigil. At 2:03 a.m., Adrian carried a box to his car. At 3:16, another box. At 3:58, a suitcase. At 4:12, a thin flat object. At 4:23, he lifted the last box and stood looking at the sky in the exact way a person looks at a ceiling when they are telling themselves they will sleep. Then he got in and drove away. The next morning, Lena called. He's gone, she said. You're free, I said. No, she said. I'm myself. It's better. We went for coffee. We did not talk much. We sat without words the way people sometimes can only after the worst is over and before the next thing begins. Months passed. The Merton was boarded. Another developer bought the lien at a discount and said the word community, often enough to convince himself he loved it. The pastor moved to another church. The bank officer got a promotion and a column in the paper where he advised people how to avoid scams. The inspector general sent me a thank you letter with a signature that looked like a pair of skates. Lena painted a series of doors. One with blue thread. One with a hand on the knob. One standing open on a room with no floor and yet, somehow light. The gallery hung them and wrote a paragraph in the brochure calling them Investigations of Shelter, Inheritance, Female Consequence. I laughed and cried and bought the second one with my own money, and when I hung it a little crooked, because that is how our doors had always hung when the heat made the wood swell. On the day of the show, I saw, across the room, a face that made my breath sit up. He was older than he had any right to be. Life had done him no favors. He stood near the wall, not looking at any painting. He watched my daughter from a distance that knew its number in inches, not in years. He had the sloped shoulders of a man who has apologized too often in the wrong direction. I walked over. He did not flinch, which I admit surprised me. "You should not be here," I said. My voice was quiet. I have yelled exactly 6 times in my life, and none of those times were when it mattered. "I wanted to see what she made," he said. His voice was a door in winter. I heard she was in the paper somehow." "You had a phone," I said. "You had a door. You had a daughter." He nodded. He did not try to explain what unexplainable thing had hollowed him. "I sent money once," he said. "A man said he was her friend. He never delivered it. He kept calling me after, and I never picked up again." "Adrian," I said. He blinked. "Is that what he called himself to you?" he asked, which is not what an innocent man asks. He looked at me then, really looked, as if he were trying to see past the years to the girl who married him and whose voice filled rooms he thought would be his. "I'm sorry," he said, and a thing in me that had been at a near boil for 2 decades settled to warm. "Go," I said. "We can do the part where you show her your face another time. Not today. This is not your day." He went. He did not turn back. This is a sentence I write knowing it might break differently in the next life. At the end of the evening, Lena and I carried the unsold paintings to the car, laughing because we had always been our own best crew. On the pavement, an envelope. No stamp. Inside, a photograph. The Merton again, but not the basement, an upper room. A window opened to the alley where I had learned to count boxes. On the sill, carved in the soft paint, were letters. A V. A smaller V. A date. Below, the faint outline of a hand. The note said, "The ledger was never the whole thing. There is something else. If you pull that thread, hold tight. It is longer than you think." No signature again. No instruction. Just an invitation to keep going. I have learned, over 62 years, that stories end more often with a choice than with a full stop. We went home. We ate bread and salt. We told the cat the story in a tone as if it were about birds. Lena slept on the couch because she insists she likes the way the draft sounds like the ocean. I stayed up with the photograph. I traced the carved V with my finger and felt a splinter catch. The next morning, I baked poppy seed cake. Adrian is somewhere south or east, wearing someone else's name like a coat borrowed from a party host. The bank writes memos and congratulates itself. The inspector general hires a young associate who wants to make a difference until she learns difference is allergic to budgets. The councilman gives a speech in which he says transparency 3 times in a row and believes it. Plum works at a firm where no one asks about her past because what matters is what you can bring for lunch. Lena and I talk every morning while the kettle sings. Sometimes the call is 5 minutes. Sometimes it is an hour. Sometimes we are silent, and then one of us says, "Are you still there?" And the other says, "Yes," and that is the whole thing, and yet somehow the thing. The photograph is on my refrigerator under a magnet shaped like a tomato. The V shines under the light when the door opens. Some nights I dream of the pipe with blue thread and wake with the taste of snow under my tongue. On other nights, I dream of the engagement dinner, the way the room went quiet after the 3rd clip, the way the silence felt like a soft hand on my shoulder saying, "Now." On those nights, I sleep again easily, because I have done the exact thing a mother promises the heir the first time she holds her child. I watched. I did not let go. Last week, a letter arrived with no return address and a ticket inside. One line, if you want to see the ledger's author burn his own matches, sit in the last row, left side. Tuesday, 9 a.m. No signature, but a scent of lemon oil on the paper. The courthouse smells like that, and so do cheap furniture stores and certain churches. It could be a trick. It could be a trap. It could be my own curiosity dressing up as courage and asking to go dancing. I put the ticket on the table and sat with my tea until it went cold. Then I dialed Rosa and said, if you had one more move, would you make it? She laughed. Always. Even if the board is tilted. Especially then, she said. Brings the pieces where they really are. I have not decided yet. Perhaps by the time you hear this, I will have sat in the last row and watched a man with a borrowed name say, Your Honor, in a voice that shakes. Perhaps I will have stayed home and baked and read and waited for the story to knock on my door again, because sometimes it does that. It comes to those who learned patience from a lifetime of small humiliations and large loves. Perhaps I will take the photograph off the refrigerator and slide it into the blue folder with the partnership agreement, because some papers belong together, even if the law says otherwise. This is not a story about a woman who won. This is the story of a mother who refused to abandon the threat. It is the story of a ring with a voice and a ledger with bruised names and a door that only looks open if you're far enough back to see it. It is a story where the revenge is not fire but light. It is a detective story where the detective is the person everyone tells to be quiet. It is a love story where love is the decision to answer the phone anyway the morning after someone cut the line. If you need a moral, I don't have one. If you need an ending, I can give you this instead. My phone lights up at 7:02 each morning with a message from my daughter. Sometimes it's a picture of her coffee foam. Sometimes it's a single leaf on the sidewalk. Sometimes it's one word, here. Some nights, when the apartment settles, I think I hear a car in the alley, and I go to the window and look. The alley is empty. The blue thread is still there, wherever it is. The ledger hums behind its wall. The Merton waits. My granddaughter laughs in her sleep and kicks her blanket off. The cat purrs like machinery. Somewhere south or east, a man pulls a coat tight and tells himself a new name until the syllables stop cutting his tongue. He thinks I have stopped paying attention. He is wrong.
So, another story of my grandmother has end. And be clicking here, you will have when more such stories.